Just type in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, thumbs
Cool.
up. Awesome.
Thanks.
Hey, hello guys. So we're gonna get started. So before we get started with the meeting, we just wanted to kind of inform you guys about Psi and what we do. So I want you guys to meet us without masks, so we provide some photos. So in the upper left corner, we have Michaela, who's our president. On the bottom, we have Mary, our social media chair. It's me, the vice president, and then we have Haya, the secretary. All right. So the rest of our e-boards, so we have our faculty advisor, Dr. Z, and Dr. Ross, and our graduate liaison, Joseph, who's going to be hosting the meeting today. So we wanted to talk about a bit about what we do on campus, like what Psi does. So we host a variety of meetings to kind of help students navigate the psychology major and really find out more about research and fieldwork opportunities. We just want to be engaged and give you guys networking opportunities as well, like allowing you guys to network with students and with professors as well, because in reality, we're all in the same boat. So it's nice to have each other and come to each other for advice and stuff. So there's some perks of being a Psi member. Well, a lot of perks. It's a lifelong membership. You get networking opportunities, like I said before. There's scholarships and grants available once you are a member. Those are available on the website. You get to wear a cord as an honor at graduation. And there's a lot of resources on the Psi website. You can find conducting research opportunities, tools for research, how to get involved, or if you want to learn more about that. There's also undergraduate awards and grants. So you can get grants for conducting any research that you might be interested in. So this could be like a summer internship type of thing. So there's a lot of benefits to that.
So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the application process, but I do want to mention, although there are some really amazing perks of being a Psi member, you don't have to be a Psi member to attend these meetings. So any meeting that you see us post on our Instagram, we're going to have 2 more this semester. You're welcome to come even if you are not an official member of the Honor Society. But if you are interested in applying to be a member, here we'll have a link. It's also in our link tree in our Instagram. So if you're interested in applying, that's where you would go. The application is due in February, so you can apply now, but we won't be reviewing applications until February. And here on the screen, this is basically what it would look like. Once you press apply now, it'll actually show you probably extremely similar applications to what we have here. After you submit your application, you would receive an email from our faculty advisors letting you know that you've been accepted. And the next step after that is paying your one-time membership fee of $55. Once you pay this, there is no additional fees and you're a lifetime member. You will also be getting an email with your member username, ID, and password with a summary of different benefits that come with being a member. You would use this username and ID to log on to the Psi website to apply for scholarships and grants, etc. The last 2 years, we've had our induction ceremony online virtually, but we're hoping to have this year's induction in person. We'll have more details on that later on. And we really hope that you guys follow us on Instagram and Facebook to stay connected with updates. We always post our flyers. The link to apply for Psi will be on our link tree. If you have any questions that you're not able to ask us now, you'll also be able to find our email on our Instagram. So we really encourage you guys to follow us.
Yeah, you guys could always DM us as well or send any messages if you have any questions at all about anything.
And now we're going to turn it over to Joseph.
So I do have this next over. Right. How's everybody doing today? So while I plug in, so I'm Joseph. I'm now a 4th year PhD student in the psychology department. I work with technically Dr. LeBou in the child research lab, as well as with, I don't know, maybe some of you remember, Dr. Elizabeth Bonowitz who's now at Harvard. And today, I'm going to be talking to you and sort of hoping to actually like talk with you and hear your thoughts and questions on sort of applying to post-bachelor graduates, post-bachelor experiences. So whether that's a master's or a PhD, or just looking for, say, a job related to research. So I'm hoping that I'm going to just be a little more conversational, bring up points here and there. And at any point you feel like you have a question, just feel free to raise your hand and hopefully I notice. Oops, I tend to look at the slide. I wish I had these things when I was an undergrad. Yeah. So enough for missing. Okay, so this is a road to the post-bachelor education. It's something we started doing last year. We did it over Zoom, where just presenting different things that maybe you can focus on. It's post-bachelor research, so sticking in psychology is something you want to do after you graduate. So again, this is just going to be very informal, but I'm going to be focusing on sort of three overarching topics of organization, networking, and time management. And as I work through each of these sort of three larger topics, I'll be breaking them down and trying my best to give you some specific recent examples. So things that I literally edited this morning or yesterday afternoon. So we're going to jump right into organization. And we're going to be talking about a few things such as finding programs of interest, figuring out the needs for the applications, and figuring out deadlines. So there are just a number of ways you can figure out which programs are of interest to you. There are things such as societal memberships or listservs. So I'll go over some examples on the next slide. Then there's also social media, so Twitter. And I think even recently, some labs are starting to open up Instagrams. I think ours does, but we're not recruiting actively. But Twitter is booming. There's a bunch of hashtags with the word academic something something, and usually there's something for everyone that you can find there. And then the other one is just word of mouth and networking. Socializing is scary. I'm out of breath, but we're gonna keep going. So the first point that I brought up were the societal memberships or listservs. The main thing I want to point out when I talk about these things is that you should not be paying for any of this information. Every single sort of piece of information on what programs are hiring or which programs are sort of recently available, that should not be of any charge to you. You can find it online. Okay.
It's like a big ass hole or some shit. It's called.
Yes. So there are a few ways you can get your hands on this information if you don't know how to do it yourself. The first is to just start by poking away at like the sort of largest, highest level of the hierarchy. So in our case, it tends to be the American Psychological Association. And there are other ones that are also available on social media, such as the Association for Psychological Science, the Society for Research in Child Development, and then the Cognitive Science Society, to name a very small few. And the nice thing about all of these societal listservs is, excuse me, that they share all the opportunities immediately related to them, but as well as overlapping ones from other societies, because people tend to be members of multiple ones. So hopefully you guys can read at least the title of that. So this is a post from earlier today, actually, where someone is looking for master's students and they're actively recruiting them. So typically it'll include a very short summary of the program, as well as like direct links if it's over the listserv. So there's a lot less ambiguity because you tend to be getting it directly from the person trying to hire, right? And again, you can find not just excuse me, graduate coursework. So there's master's ones, there's PhD ones. They also hire research technicians and research staff. Totally just gonna share. As well as sort of like remote and in-person opportunities. So these are things you can keep an eye out for. And if you have an idea of your general interests, you may be interested in maybe asking one of the professors here that aligns with that, if they're willing to share any recent listserv listings. The second one that requires less talking in person to somebody is Twitter. So as I mentioned, academic Twitter is going off lately. Academics really miss going to conferences and talking to each other. So we just meet up and talk, not talk poop to each other on Twitter. So for example, here is the one for the APA Association. There are sort of non-official ones, such as Open Academics. Some of these tend to be multidisciplinary, so it's not just psychology. However, you might find that the skills you develop as a psychologist overlap with other fields indirectly. You may be developing skills that are sort of soft skills, like being able to use Excel and SPSS, learning how to communicate information to the audience, so public speaking and things like that. And then finally, you can see direct advertisements from people hiring themselves, similar to the listserv, except now you get a face to the person, and you can also sort of browse their Twitter profile and get an idea of what kind of person they are. Because what's particularly important in graduate school, if that's something you're searching out for, is being sort of amicable with whoever is advising you. It tends to be a sort of long, drawn out process. For example, the program here for psychology is 5 years. Some schools it's 4 years. And the idea is you want to make sure that you're actually pursuing something that you want, not the paper. Right? Oh, yes.
I just also wanted to point out, like what Joseph was saying, it's really important that you, match with someone that you really feel has the same interests as you and that you think is going to guide you throughout your graduate process, because, sometimes just because a researcher is good at researching, it doesn't mean that they're a good mentor. So you also have to think about how the person that you're going to be working with should be able to mentor you well, so you learn like how to be a good researcher as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the point. Like you can tell sort of just by having conversations with these people, these sort of potential advisors, what kind of advice they have. And then the sort of last very open-ended way to find programs is just word of mouth and networking. So approaching your professors and sort of asking sort of stronger questions, not just about like the current coursework, but also any underlying research interests, if you believe that what they're researching themselves may be of interest to you, and vice versa. And I'll be talking a bit more about this later on. But for now, we're going to look at just a bit more specific stuff on organization. So figuring out application requirements. Some schools are black and white and they just post it for you to see. Other schools tend to hope that you email an administrator and get the package information. So we're going to look at a specific case here, which is the Rutgers School of Applied Professional Psychology down in New Brunswick. And what you can do, I believe we're going to share the slides. So there's the link there for anyone that wants to click on that specifically. And when you click on that, you end up on the program's website. And scrolling down leads you to the number of programs that are available to apply to there. So currently at Rutgers-Newark, we don't have a PhD in clinical psychology. So a lot of students that are interested in it here tend to also apply down there, things like that. And what happens is when you end up on this site, not only do you find out the sort of application deadlines and requirements, but it also gives you an avenue for figuring out who the faculty and staff are. All right. So if we click on this, and again, some cherry-picked examples because of the information they provide, you tend to get these sort of short blurbs about each of the potential academic advisors. And what it is that you can get an idea, again, of their broader research interests. All right. So if we take a look specifically at Dr. Ball here, right, we see that she's interested in investigating adult and child autism. But more importantly, you get a longer description of their research interests. And this professor here actually decided to list information on their recruitment process as well as their own lab website. Sometimes professors don't include this information, and you'll just have to do a quick Google search to do that. And the reason it's important to not only see that they're advertising the hiring process, but that they're advertising their lab as a whole by including the website link, is you can also get an idea of who the students currently are in the lab. Because when you look at the students that are currently in the lab, they tend to do quite a bit of work as well. And you can get a general idea of the very specific research topics that the professor might be interested in. So for example, my advisor is broadly interested in cognitive development. She does research on learning, theory, change, decision-making, etc. But I'm specifically interested in learning when experiencing different emotional states. So when you look at the students' research interests, and sometimes they also include their own website, you can get a finer grain understanding of the different projects going on in the lab, right? Because another thing is that the more advanced students in labs sometimes take on the newer incoming students, and they collaborate with each other to get the newer students started. All right. Does anyone have questions, by the way? Is everything sort of clear? Yeah. If I'm speaking too fast, let me know. I'll try and slow down, but I guess we'll just keep chugging along. Right. Something important here is when you find the program as a whole's information. So this is for organizational psychology for the PSI. You can find information on when applications are due. And this sort of gets at a question we got on social media of when you should start applying. Now, there's no immediate answer to this question because it's going to be entirely dependent on when your applications are due for each school. For example, master's programs tend to have due dates sometime in January, February, sometimes even March. But PhD programs sometimes have applications due as early as the end of November or even in December. So something that you need to keep in mind is that you're regularly checking your programs of interest to make sure you're not falling behind and have to rush, because they tend to require things like recommendation letters, and you don't want to sort of throw that on a professor who probably will either reject it or give you a particularly weak letter that's just generic. Right. Right. So moving forward, I'm going to talk now a little bit about networking. And this is in terms of reaching out to potential advisors, as well as reaching out to potential reference letter writers. Yes.
There's a question.
Sure.
Does Rutgers any branch have a master's program in counseling that fulfills the LAC requirements?
Rutgers. No, Newark definitely, yeah, Newark doesn't have any clinical work. I'm not sure if Rutgers-New Brunswick does. So the answer to the immediate one is Rutgers-Newark does not, but New Brunswick might. So a good question. Does anybody else have any questions? Everybody's doing good. It's a little toasty in here, or it might just be me.
No, it is.
So again, networking is important because we want to reach out to potential advisors, but we also want to make sure we're keeping in touch with our reference or recommendation letter writers. And the reason you might want to do that is because you might want to figure out their academic interests, want to make sure they know how awesome you are recently and what you're doing. And you also want to keep up with them to see if maybe they're also doing a project that you would be interested in and seeing if they have an opening or some work you can do for it. Okay. And it's important to network early, I think. And this goes hand in hand with the when to start applying. So figuring out when to sort of reach out to someone feels like sort of the sooner the better, like the best time is like yesterday. And the idea is that graduate students are particularly stressed. I think we're one of the most depressed categories in America. And it's just because we tend to isolate ourselves, not we, I've been working on it. People tend to isolate themselves and trying to just get their work done, thinking it's sort of about this perfectionist mindset when really science is collaboration, right? So don't be afraid to reach out to someone. The worst thing that can happen, you know, is like you just get ghosted, right? I mean, it happens in every realm of the world. So thanks for the laugh. Yes. As I mentioned earlier, it's very important to figure out your academic interests early. You don't want to be applying to a program that's interested in investigating autism if you yourself are interested in investigating dyslexia, just because they're investigating disorders. You don't want to be in a lab that investigates child development, that focuses on emotions when you're actually interested in cognition, because they're not the same thing. There are very specific niches that are always sort of specific to each lab, as I mentioned, and that get finer and finer as you move down the sort of advisement hierarchy. And the other reason is that graduate school is intense. You tend to take courses for another 2 to 3 years at the graduate level. And they're basically just 2 to 3 years of writing intensive courses. You tend to have to read a lot, and you tend to get filled with meetings and things like that. So it's something important to keep in mind when you're applying for schools, if that's something you want to do. And remember that it's a long haul. And then the sort of second point of figuring out not only your own, but other people's academic interests is the need to adjust application materials to the school or program you're applying to. So you will typically not be able to get away with having your cookie cutter application and just sending it to every school, changing up the school name and the professor's name.
In fact, the
Professors and potential advisors typically look out for people who can sort of highlight the fact that they have these creative ideas. And the reason they look out for these things is because it's hard. Being a scientist and figuring out new theories to test is a hard thing. If anyone's taken either stats or research methods, you sort of recognize that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That class, yeah. That class is a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea here is it goes hand in hand with reaching out early, because the sooner you start practicing it, the sooner you're going to start recognizing the relevant skills for developing theory, right? Yes.
I also wanted to point something out that I like to be told. Someone told me about the importance of like getting research experience before, or just getting experience in what you think you want to work in, or what you think that you're interested in, whether that be like something clinical, like if you're interested in working with like eating disorders or something like that, like the population that you're interested with, like it helps to volunteer to work in that field or in that realm. And the same applies with research. Like if you're interested in developmental research, then you should definitely try to be an RA in a developmental research lab, so you can make sure that that is the graduate study that you want to continue once you graduate from Rutgers. Next month, we are going to be having a meeting talking about how to get involved with research on campus. So make sure to look out for that. But also, like next semester, we're going to talk about how to get involved with jobs other than just research, because you know Rutgers-Newark is a primarily research-based university. So I feel like we don't really have that many clinical opportunities available to us, but there are opportunities out there, so we are going to be talking about that. So I just wanted to point that out.
That's an excellent point, and thank you for bringing that up. I think we're on the same mindset because I think I updated some slides to account for that. 'Cause I think last year we got a lot of questions on sort of not masters and PhD, but like, what if I just want to work? You know?
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
it's like, what if I had loans, you know? So.
Can I just say one quick thing?
Question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello?
You can go.
So I just wanted to say a quick thing, because I'm actually, yeah, no, maybe so. Hello,
Is it Taisha?
I think that
or-
is done.
Yes.
you guys
hello?
me?
Oh, hi.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're just a little.
Okay,
Yeah. go ahead.
sorry about that. I just wanted to say a quick thing in regards to, I think what Diamira was just saying. Because and it goes back with what Joseph was also saying with networking. I'm currently in my first year in the clinical psych PhD program. And one of the things is I'm currently receiving a lot of emails from students who are interested in going into my program. And I would just say, when networking, make sure also to kind of make sure it's brief and straight to the point, because one thing I could tell you is that the advisors also don't want to read long things that don't get to the, like, you don't ask anything important or you don't get to the point. I'm always one of those people that likes mentoring or providing help in this sense, but you want to make sure that when you're emailing the professors that you're interested in working with, you're not writing a full-blown essay to them, because they're not going to read it. And neither are the graduate students, because we really just don't have the time to do that. So that's just one thing. And when networking, make sure you're concise and getting like clear and concise. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Taisha.
Taisha. That was Taisha. She was the president of Psych here at Rutgers-Newark last year. And that's just a wonderful point too. Let's keep beating me to my points. The other thing is applying to graduate school is similar to sort of job searches in a way, because you tend to get a salary, or you're doing sort of 40 to 60 to 80 hours of work a week for someone else. And the idea here is when they're reviewing applications, a lot of the times when they do their first round, it's similar to sort of workplace hirings, where they'll skim the resume or skim your CV or skim like your one-page personal statement. So that is a wonderful point to keep in mind. And that's something that I think also in your coursework, you might recognize when people are telling you, oh, you need to sort of be more brief. There's a lot of sort of floweriness to this, maybe cut to the chase, there's this sort of extraneous information. Yes, so that's a wonderful point. Now, continuing on with this networking training. The idea here is you also, if you're developing this sort of scientific relationship with a potential advisor or another student, you should make sure you're keeping up to date with what they're actually interested in. I'm not going to point fingers, but there are a few people in our department who don't update their website. So they have things on it from maybe 10, 15, or even 20 years ago, where you can't get an idea of what they're actually doing right now. And you have to hope for the best when you go on Google Scholar and hope they have an open access paper that you can scan to figure out their current interests. So this is a good way to make sure you're keeping up with what's going on in the lab. And they might also just, maybe sometimes they're feeling nice and they say, oh, I have some funding, you should apply. I might be hiring an extra student. Again, sort of a personal anecdote. My professor managed to take on me, and I was a third student in her lab, because she managed to find funding that I also helped her apply for, but that's another story. And the idea is that there's sort of these subjective occurrences that happen minute by minute. So it's always best to try and keep yourself up to date. And importantly, just keeping them updated about yourself. briefly. Let them know, like, oh, I won this award, or I started working on this project with Dr. such and such, or we've recently sort of submitted a paper or something like that. In the worst case scenario, you know, we just end up with sort of someone that's not your direct mentor, but just someone that's giving you advice, or someone you talk about science with, if that's what you're interested in doing. Time management, we're here till like 3:50. Okay. So we have plenty of time. And we're going to talk about things like preparing your personal and research statements, preparing your records. So you might need a resume, you might need a curriculum vitae, which is just an academic resume. You might need transcripts, background checks, etc. And then just a single slide on the GRE, because that takes a whole workshop in itself to talk about. And I am very underqualified for that. So when it comes to preparing your personal and research statements, something worthwhile is sharing it with not just mentors and letter writers, but other people that you sort of trust and your sort of field of science or whatever field you're looking to go into. And the thing here is that feedback is incredibly important. This goes hand in hand with that sort of student isolation aspect, where we tend to put ourselves in a vacuum and we don't have the perspective from an outside point of view. So having somebody else take a look at it to give you feedback and say like, oh, this is kind of wishy-washy, or, oh, you forgot to mention that you did this the other day, or that you forgot to mention this award you won, because maybe you're underselling yourself, a lot of things that people tend to do. But the main point is you want to make sure that whatever materials you're submitting are as sort of best in quality as they can be. And typically one of the amazing ways to do that is through collaboration. Okay. And the idea here is someone had asked about asking for letters of recommendation, or when to start asking for them in general. And the idea is you might have either an outline or even a finished like first or second draft of these materials if you really, really want to help out the person that's writing your letter. First of all, to show them that you're devoted to the work and that you're involved in it. It's not just something you're applying to on the side because you just want to make sure your parents are happy or anything. But it also gives them, again, an idea of who you are as a person. Like, what about yourself are you trying to sell? And what about yourself are you trying to say you want to improve or focus on researching? Or even if this is like a cover letter for work, a way for you to see what sort of strengths that other people related to your field might think you should include. This is again that sort of mindset and perspective issue. Right? And the idea here is, as with just applying in general, sooner is always better. It's never too early to get in contact with someone about a program you're interested in applying to. Because it's always better to give them 2 months and then they end up writing it the last day anyway, as opposed to asking them the week of and them saying, oh, I'm fully booked. Right? And that also is important because typically you'll have to revise and update your personal or research statements. And as I mentioned earlier, this should be tailored to each school that you're applying to make sure you're giving yourself the best chance of getting it. One way you can make sure that you're highlighting for the schools that you're worth being sort of recruited or for a workplace or a job is by looking at the specific call or application portal and seeing if there are specific questions they're asking, specific skills that they're highlighting of interest, basically what the position wants you to do, and explain how you are the best person to either learn how to do it amazingly or capable of doing it amazingly already. And this sort of gives you a way to point out how you yourself can grow, as well as how you can help wherever you're applying to grow, whether it be a school or workplace. Okay. And this is sort of just a very useful writing resource, whether it be for academic papers, cover letters for jobs, research or personal statements for schools. And it's entirely free by Barbara Sebeka. I think she's at California Irvine right now. And it just goes into detail about seeing these things as a meaningful process. You don't just push it out because it's due tomorrow or things like that. Right? Because that's how you really sort of excel and sell yourself in the workplace or in academia. And then sort of really hammering in the importance and sort of relevance of social media regularly, especially nowadays. People are posting free sit-in workshops where you can get practice doing these things. So this is actually from last year. I think she's planning to do it again this year by Dr. Candace Mills in Texas. And what she does is she has students in the department as well as herself go through like a workshop like this, as well as taking time to sit down and talk about specific aspects with each student if time permits. Then it's just these tiny, tiny points. Make sure you know what things are required. Most schools require at least an unofficial transcript, sometimes an official one. And schools tend to, but don't always, require resumes or CVs. Jobs usually always require CVs, and that might be the only thing you end up sending to them. And importantly, not just any personal statements or cover letters, you should also be making sure you're keeping an eye on your resume or your CV, whichever one you're working on. Some recent studies in the decision-making realm look at what's called the presenter's paradox. And the idea of the presenter's paradox is that, say, we as presenters are trying to share our resume or our CV, and we think that on average, perhaps, or not we necessarily, but on average, people tend to think that when others are looking at their resume, they perform a summation. So like, this is worth 1 point, this is worth 2 points, this is worth 3 points, so it's like a total of 6 points. But when they looked at ratings of sort of people hiring those submissions of resumes, they were actually performing calculations that were related to, say, averaging. So it's a 1 + 2 + 3 divided by 3. So it would actually get a score of 2, as opposed to the summation of 6 that you may believe you're giving them. And the reason I want to point this out is because, again, it's important to make sure you're tailoring things. When you include information that is like kind of cool, like worth a point, it actually brings down the average of sort of the score that the document would have in the eyes of the typical reviewer, right? So it's something to keep in mind in terms of that sort of extraneous or wishy-washy thing. Not really much to say about this. Just make sure that if they require an unofficial one, you can just get that online and download the PDF. But if they require an official one, you typically have to apply either online or go to the registrar, specifically here, and ask them to mail it directly to the school or mail it to you to be forwarded to them. And this is for sort of confidential reasons to confirm that nothing's being doctored and things like that. As you can see, I didn't revise fully. And again, this itself requires sort of whole workshops and one-on-one sort of meeting, as I mentioned, that Dr. Mills tends to do online. And again, this is something worth getting feedback on. So if there's something you can take out of this, let's sort of share with other people what you're interested in doing and ask them for feedback. Whether or not you incorporate the feedback, I mean, you're your own person, but at least consider what they're trying to get at when they share it with you. And I sort of GRE. The main thing I would say on this is to make sure that the school even requires it anymore. A number of schools in the past year have just dropped it entirely. in particular schools throughout California. Get what other states, but California is the example state, so you can get an idea of what I mean. You need to sort of make sure you're recognizing your own needs and studying. I'm an awful standardized test taker, so I took it twice with a few months between. And that's also a good point, is to make sure you're scheduling it so that in the worst case scenario, you have time to take it again. So maybe like 3 to 4 months out, so that you can take it again in 2 months, etc., things like that. All right. Do we have any questions before we sort of start wrapping things up? Okay. Hopefully I'm being clear. Yes.
This might be a good question to ask, but do recommendation letters get sent back to you, or do they send them?
That's a good question. So when you're applying for schools, sometimes they will give you the option when you're requesting your letters from somebody to see it yourself. So what you typically do nowadays is you log into the school's website, you make yourself an account, and then you put in the person's email for who's getting the recommendation letter, and they just email it directly. But if you click on the option when it's available to see it yourself, that tends to clue in the recommender that, oh, they're gonna see this. I don't wanna say like things like that. They might write sort of a more generic, softer letter to not offend you since you reach out to them because it's sort of a very personal thing. So it's actually recommended usually that you do your best to not see these letters when it comes to the academic application process. Also because that also shows the school that you want to see what these people are saying about you. Like you don't feel secure in yourself enough to know that this person thinks well or not well of you. Because then it's like, why would you choose that person? Like it gives you, there's a lot of uncertainty that you're building up when you do that. It's a great question. Any other questions? Yeah,
How
sure.
many recommendation letters do we need? And does it have to be from professors or could be?
So that's also going to vary by school. I think Rutgers-Newark, they require 3. For example, I know some schools only require 2. And it'll state who is qualified to submit a letter on your behalf on the website, usually where it lists the requirements. I don't remember for Rutgers-Newark exactly who was allowed to, but typically, if it's an academic program, you would want 3 people you may have done research with or done really well in an advanced class with. Say you took stats or research methods here and you got a really good grade. You can ask the professor and your TA if you had one to jointly write you a letter, and that could tend to look good. If you're an RA for a professor and you're an RA, but you end up working directly with a graduate student, not the professor. Both, like I've written letters for people jointly with my professor. So it really depends on the school specifically. And it's also something to keep in mind, like make sure you're picking someone that can actually represent what you're capable of, not just the person you got, not just because you got an A in Psych 101. It's like what does that tell you? It's like you can take a multiple choice test. Like, any other questions? It's a great.
I'll share on like my experience, the only times that they allow or, tell you that you can send a letter rec from someone who's not a professor is when you've been like out of school. So like, let's say you left school and then you are now trying to apply to grad programs, they'll allow you to submit letters of recommendations from employers. But what I've seen is mostly they want professors.
Yeah, and I think another point like on that is also if you're applying not to an academic program, like maybe you want to make sure you're submitting letters or getting letters submitted based on people you like research with, not your professor you took class with or people you might have done clinical work with, things like that. Yeah, so these are definitely great points to highlight. Yeah, of course. Any other questions? Something online?
Yeah, if it's like, okay. How do you find trusted mentors that will guide you through the grad school application process statements, cover letters, letters of recommendations? I'm currently a senior planning on applying for my master's in counseling this December.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So it's sort of who you even speak to yourself. You sort of feel alone, right? And that gets at some of the points on networking. So if you're a student here at Rutgers-Newark, that's all a response.
It's just says yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so it sort of gets at, yeah, again, that isolation point, but you need to start networking. So perhaps you're taking a course in development with a few people teach it. So we have Dr. Vanderwall, we have Dr. Labou, we have, I don't know, she's still there, Dr. Maloney. You have somebody that you took a class with on a specific topic that you enjoyed. You might try to reach out to them directly and see if they have any opportunities going on. And then you're starting to build this relationship. And if you end up working with them and you show yourself to be this sort of wonderful student and research assistant, it might pose to them that, oh, maybe if they ask me for sort of like help with applying to school, maybe I'll go that little extra mile for this specific student. And this is sort of how people bridge themselves into doing like honors theses or working on conference or journal papers with a professor even early on in their career. Like even if they end up being like fourth or fifth author, like it doesn't really matter, it's paper. And the idea is it's really just about networking and making those connections if you're trying to find a specific expert to help you out. And this doesn't just apply to professors, like it's if you're working in a clinical or in a clinic and you're helping them with a sort of patients or outpatient information, things, other buzzwords about clinic that I don't know. If they recognize that you're sort of doing amazing at this and you show promise for this type of work at sort of the higher level, then you can sort of poke them about it, you know? It's again, it's like sort of like taking your shot and hoping for the best. That was a long one. Great question.
What if I lack in clinical experience?
Then this is something you might want to go and try and see if you can figure out some available resources or available internships. So I'm gonna skip around a second. So if you don't mind going to like slide 37.
Okay.
And this doesn't just, so the slide I'm showing now and the slide that Haya is going to bring up. So yeah, just keep on going. Okay. All right. So this is, so since you're online, it seems maybe you're sort of not able to come up to campuses regularly, and you might want to look for a remote opportunity. Something wonderful that postdoc, or I think a current professor now even, Dr. Melton Mussel put together and is leading, is the psych research list. And research doesn't just apply to like the sort of research where you're in a lab and you're doing things, but also potentially if you're interested in doing clinical work, whether it be sort of practice or the research in it. But there are just a stupendous number of testimonies on this growing collaboration among experts in all fields of psychology using this website, Psych Research List. And the idea here is like the best time to begin again is like it's never a best time. You can just, when you feel comfortable pushing yourself to put yourself out there is the best time. I know I said yesterday is the best time at times, but some of us take a minute, right? And then there's also on-campus things. So if we go back, actually, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Right. So I think toward the end of the semester, was it? Or I don't remember when we have like the research workshop thing with Psychi.
We're gonna have that next month, November 3rd.
Mhm.
We're gonna talk about lab recruitment and how to apply for labs and things like that.
Exactly. Yes. So, and that's a perfect time because labs tend to recruit students towards the end of the semester to start the next semester, if it's for things like credit or even payment. But there's also the off chance you might just randomly start volunteering tomorrow. Like if you email them and work through the process of getting added onto all the clearances and things like that. Then you can also look online for social media, things like that. And of course, I'm gonna say it again, networking. So there's a number of ways you can sort of find these opportunities. And the best time to really start is whenever you think you're ready, or whenever you sort of get that motivation. Good question. Good answer. Any other questions? Yes.
The exam, do we take it junior year or senior year?
So, so that's it depends on when you plan to apply to the schools. You're talking about the GRE? Yeah. So it really depends on when those deadlines are, and what year you plan to take. Some students, this is just a broad announcement. It is becoming very normal to take a year or two between undergraduate and master's or PhD. Like, don't beat yourself up. A lot of people use those years to get experience doing research or doing clinical work or just working in general. But the idea is you want to make sure you're looking at the deadlines for each of the programs. So I guess you would find whichever of the programs you're applying to, the earliest one is, and scheduling it a few months out, or depending on, again, like you have to know yourself. Like, I suck at studying. Like if I have a screen in front of me, I'm just gonna be on YouTube. Like I can't get around that. And even like I try to study, like I'll have the book in front of me, I'll read a page, and then I'll just go wing the exam anyway. Like, so the idea is you really have to schedule and build your own schedule around it. So if you think you need a lot of time to study and you want to make sure you give yourself that second chance, if you think you didn't do well in the first try, you might schedule it like 7 to 8 months out or something even, so you can have that 4 months out. Oh. Wait. Question?
Cassidy, do you want to say something?
No, sorry, my mic was just on for a second.
It's okay.
So there's no other questions from the audience. I have some other ones from the social media that we pulled from Instagram. So if you want to jump ahead a little bit, I think, or backwards actually.
Okay,
Sorry.
it's okay.
And I'm like jumping around sides. There we go. Yeah, follow us. I think we already passed some of the stuff around. But this is the way you can also get in touch with us. Any specific questions, whether it's related to the post-bachelor experiences or just anything in general, like how you can be more involved in psychology, things like that.
We're constantly checking that social media, so send in any questions that you have.
So we already touched on this question. So I'm going to move forward. And now, money. There's a few ways you can get an idea of how to get money for grad school. Master programs vary. Some of them you have to pay for fully outright, no matter what. Some of them give sort of highly rated students that wrote really good research and personal statements a lot of money to help them fund it. And then there are PhD programs similar. For example, the one here, we actually get paid in our tuition remission by being TAs. And then other schools, you are actually sort of on your own except for tuition. You don't have to apply for external funding through grants and fellowships.
Oh, so I don't know if this applies to like going to graduate school for psychology, but I heard that there's this program that if you do like research with a professor in grad school, like your tuition can be paid for. Do you know about that?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is what you mean, but there's also a case where I think I mentioned when it came to networking, like perhaps your professor has money that they can pay you with themselves and use for tuition remission. Like if they had applied for a grant and it said, oh, I want to hire a student to help me do that.
Okay.
If you're doing strictly research, that tends to fall onto a fellowship or a grant like that, except that one might have been when you apply for yourself, or it might have been offered to you based on your application to graduate school.
Okay.
So again, yes, I'm sure those statements are good. Sometimes they just spontaneously give you $10,000 a year. I have a couple friends that got that in our department. Yes, and the idea here is you can sort of find these opportunities for the ones that you have to apply for yourself, either by looking through the sort of university-specific funding opportunities, or looking through sort of advisement opportunities related to funding. So for example, Rutgers recently, the past few years, has had built up a grad fund system, which is okay. And they tend to have a lot of information on external fellowships. So things with like the National Institute of Health or National Institutes of Health, NIH, National Science Foundation, Ford Foundation, Yapos Foundation, you know, people who make Sesame Street, things like that. So for example, if you're looking for school-specific ones, here's an example of Rutgers, Rutgers-Newark sort of university-wide available fundings. So you have like the presidential fellowship, what I mentioned, where they really like you, and then the person you're applying to be advised by, a petition for you to get it. There's a few other ones here. The Dean's Dissertation Fellowship. So that if you're at the tail end, you would apply for that to get funding for finishing your PhD. Then there's also that Rutgers grad fund system, where maybe the text is a bit small, but in the search bar, you can just fill in what field you're looking at and what level you're at. So master's, PhD, non-degree, as well as like length and sort of amount. So like, I just need $5,000 to, I need $5 million, things like that. Yes. Anybody have any questions about funding things? And then there's sort of this very sort of hard to answer question regarding going abroad, so out of the country. I feel like this is it's not something I'm familiar with, but I feel like it probably is. And if anybody else has any ideas and wants to discuss, feel free to just shout them out. But you have to figure out things like visas. So I know like if you're coming into America to be a student, you need to get an F1 visa or a J1 visa if you're just part-time with master's visiting, things like that. You have to keep into consideration language barriers if it's not one of your native tongues. But you can usually find opportunities for abroad research things via listservs or Twitter. So again, I think this one's yesterday afternoon for Morocco. They're hiring 4 PhD students. Yeah, this is sort of just goes hand in hand with the idea of keeping yourself updated if it's something you really, really want to pursue. And I think that's all I have. Thank you guys all for listening. But happy to talk about any questions related to this.
Also, quick thing, if anybody is interested in going into clinical psychology and would like a resource, feel free to utilize my information. I tend to make myself very available to students as I don't want anybody to have like a terrible experience. And first step is actually coming to one of these psych events. So appreciate it for coming to the event. But feel free to use me as a resource if you have any questions and you're interested in clinical psych PhD programs. And also, if you're going to get involved in like social media and being like interacting with like professors, make sure to have 2 separate social medias. Yeah. Don't have your personal and your educational the same one. Let's not do that. But that's all for me.
Make sure you're being PC and not putting yourself too out there. Make sure it's information that's relevant. So
So how many people are?
do you mind actually going back to 10 slides?
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
they're just like random things to think about.
Sorry.
You asked, no, go ahead. Well, you
I was
asked.
asking like who's in the room is actually a senior.
Yeah. So, what are those for? These are just things that a lot of advisors, when you first talk to them about grad school or just research in general, might try and point out, like things to think about. Whether or not you, like, what is exactly the goal in it? What sort of, do you want to take time off first, like, take a year or two to work, or if you have the funds for it, just take a year or two to sort of deal with the stress from not only being a college student, but being a college student in the pandemic. Yeah. Thanks guys so much.
Also, any questions or comments? You guys thinking of applying to graduate school now? Yeah. Oh, Brenda?
Yeah,
You're applying right now?
yeah, but it's for occupational therapy. And,
Oh, I'm doing physical therapy.
Dr. Ramona Ross has helped me a lot. She's been one of my recommenders and stuff, and I worked at the lab as well.
Yeah, I remember.
But I actually want to talk to you about that, not a question about it. But I think like the hardest part for me is like my resume and CV and trying to make like the stuff that I've done relevant to my programs and kind of tailoring it that way. Like for me, like a lot of my programs are asking about like social justice issues and how it relates to like the medical field, like OT, PT. And I work at the HLC office, so I'm trying to figure out how to tailor everything, which is a little annoying because I have to do it separately for each account. So like a lot of schools, like you're saying, like you have to create your own account for everything. But on top of that, like there's a centralized page, but only one of my schools is using that. And then all my other schools, I have to like manually fit in every single class I'm taking, like all the codes and everything. That's very tedious work. And they're already like interviewing people and stuff. And I'm like, I haven't even written my personal statements. Like I haven't even done any of that. So it's definitely like really nerve-wracking and everything, even when you see like the people that have gone to some of these info sessions. And like there's no diversity in there. Like I have been to a couple and it's just so like imposter syndrome is very real. And I feel like I didn't feel that here at Rutgers, but now at grad school, I'm like, thanks.
Yeah.
Can I be a little not PC? Am I being recorded?
Do you want to stop recording?
No, I think it's fine.
Okay,
I'm speaking facts, I'm not speaking opinion.
go ahead, go on.
Psychology is heavily white male dominated. The student body is largely female, but the people sort of being brought higher and higher in the hierarchy, it's starting to become more female and non-binary centric. And sort of the recent year and a half or so, where people are forced to see things happening in the world, is sort of like the diversity thing. That's the PC version of what I wanted to say. Definitely put yourself confident. That's why it's important, like sell yourself, right?
Yeah, but it's weird because like in high school, they wanted us to use like the diversity card to your advantage. It's like yes and no sometimes. Like I don't know how to feel about it. But now in grad school, like some of the schools like explicitly ask you like, do you feel like you're underprivileged? If so, like explain why or like give details and stuff like that. Like it's weird that they ask that, and I don't know if like is this working towards my advantage or disadvantage.
It'll work too. I've had enough personal statements of my own where I wrote, yeah, I grew up broke, like this bluntly, or like I'm a Filipino American. I know like 2 other Filipinos in psychology that are doctors. Like so bringing up those issues because representation is entirely like you can speak to Dr. Luis Rivera and a few others. Everyone's research programs, and I feel that. But like it's important to really show like, and it sucks that you have to, but like we're fighting and we're really good at what we do, and it doesn't matter like that this is the case, but you should recognize it. That like they put you down because of it in the past, you know. Diversity is something you should definitely like speak of and be proud of. I think it's a good takeaway from that.
And for sure, one of the biggest things that they discuss, sorry, I'm still, my bad, but I feel like one of the biggest things that I will say, like in my program right now that we discuss, I'm also well, I'm not gonna say former, I'm part of HLLC as well, technically. And one of the things that we do is all about social justice. And what happened?
No, she was
like,
asking who's talking right now. Yeah, go ahead, continue.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm in DC, can't be in person. But really, one of the biggest things that they are also looking for when they ask these questions is your level of resiliency. That's a big thing that they discuss even in courses right now. So while you might feel like it's weird, use this time to bring light to the issues that are going on and also show how you've pretty much overcome it, and you will still continue to overcome it, and you will use these experiences to your advantage, because that's what they want to see. Like, yes, they want to see that, yes, these things happened or are continuously happening, but what can you do to overcome it? That's what they're really looking for. They're not going to ask that in the question, but that's really what they're looking for.
Also, change and how you want to be part of allowing more diversity to come into the field. And like we were saying, I think it's also good to point out to find like a mentor that is diverse with you as well, just so you don't feel like out of place or like someone that can relate to you. Like I know when I was working as an RA, one of my mentors, like the project manager I was working with, she told me that she really prioritized when she was applying to graduate school, like finding a mentor that is ethnically diverse as she is. So that was something that was really important to her, because she felt like she couldn't work well with someone who can't really, I guess, like relate to her or understand. And it's like, I know what you mean by that. So you might want to think about that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like most of these schools, the faculty is mostly like white women. And like I even asked like how does that like, because here like at HLLC, like Santana is my best friend, like Dean Santana, and even like everybody that's at like HLLC, it's a very diverse staff. Like there's women, there's like literally anything you can think of is there. So I feel very comfortable in that space, but looking at grad school, it's not like that. Like a lot of the faculty, and like I've kind of asked about that, like how do you really help students that have like this diverse background, like really feel comfortable and all this stuff? They're like, well, we pair you up with a mentor, like a faculty mentor, but like there's not really much else they can do.
The other thing is make sure you're not giving yourself this sort of detrimental or like deficit mindset when you're talking about this too. So somebody mentioned resilience. Was it your teacher?
It was
So it's important to recognize, like show them you can bounce back, but also show them that these are things that aren't sort of strong enough to break down someone as strong as yourself. There's a lot of work, or just like a lot of sort of mindsets are the idea that because I'm some race or ethnicity, or because I grew up in a poor neighborhood or things like that, where some people might go immediately to the fact that like, oh, the system broke me down a bit and I fought back my way up. And sometimes that is the case. But there's also the point that you should bring up that like, as a person from a diverse background, I have these strengths that made it so it didn't ruin me or it didn't bring me down. Like I'm continuing to excel. And that's sort of like the point I said, kind of like we're here because we want to maintain excellence in psychology, right? Whatever part of psychology it is.
And it just shows also that you think differently and kind of have experiencing different perspectives as well. So it's not that like generic. You bring diversity, like it's really, really big.
Any other questions?
So you mentioned that we could like take a year or two off like between undergrad and graduate. There are internships available, right, for like during those, if you're not like.
Oh, yeah, there's internships all year round. It doesn't matter, like, well, it's not, but it doesn't matter what stage you are in life. It's that, when you're able to apply and get to it, like, there are opportunities. It's just that, like, finding them is this active component. You can't be passive about it.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know,
So with the internships like available through here, would I still be able to like apply for here if I'm like not actively taking classes here?
oh, okay, yeah, of course. Yeah, that's a great question. So I have like a specific example. So a friend of mine, she was a student, she graduated already, and she just volunteered in the lab I work in before she ended up going to grad school. So she wasn't a student, but she became like university affiliated by working with the lab. So it is possible if you get in contact with people, and that's going to require some network. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is anyone interested in doing research on campus? No, okay, so our next general body meeting will be about the different research labs on campus. So if anyone is interested, that's basically what our next meeting is going to be about. We're going to be talking about different labs that are run by professors here on campus and the different ways that you can go about applying. So stay tuned for that, even if you didn't raise your hand.
Please come and help.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate it. And I hope you guys learned a lot.
If you guys have any questions, we're gonna be sitting around here.
How do you stop recording?
So. Release them, I guess. You guys can stop recording. Or
Yeah.
okay. So, girl.
How many people are on there?
I was just saying, great
There-
presentation.
Oh,
Thank you. To help people.
yeah, you did a wonderful job. There was like